Today on the show, we have Ben Sparango, the head of strategic business development at the Solana Foundation. Welcome to the channel, Ben.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So really excited to have you on. We cover Solana more than probably any other chain on the channel. So I think people will be interested to learn what you have to say. To start, why don't you give an introduction about yourself?
For sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm head of strategic BD at Solana Foundation. I work primarily on DeFi and financial applications within the Solana ecosystem, so helping people who are building on top of Solana be successful in the projects that they're building. I've been in crypto for about 8 years. I've worked within the Solana ecosystem for about the last four. Prior to that, I was at an investment firm called Multicoin Capital down in Austin, Texas, where I was on the investment team. And then before that, I did some odd jobs around the industry, working at Consensus and Republic, and really just trying to put some things on my resume.
Awesome. So before we get into Solana, do you think you could go into a little more about your background and how you got to be where you are today? Because I know there's always people asking, like, how can they break into the industry?
Totally. So yeah, I started off. My first job out of college. I was working for a non-crypto startup. I was connecting with people on Twitter. This was like 2016, 2017, and connecting with people on Twitter and people that I thought had really good ideas around where crypto was going. The thing that was like really big for me was Twitter, and two, the ability to like share your thoughts in the form of like Substack or Medium. So a lot of the connections that I made in the early days and the things that helped me get into the industry were putting my thoughts out there around where I thought the crypto industry was going, what I thought was interesting, and that helped me connect with more people and led to some of my job opportunities. So it's been a long journey since then, but that's definitely something that still holds true today. It's very much an industry that doesn't rely a ton on experience, but it does rely on your ability to get the job done that is going to be asked of you in the role.
100%. That's been my experience as well. One of my best sort of breakthroughs in terms of opportunities in the industry was probably about 3 years ago. I literally reached out to someone and offered to work for free, and then it led to all these other things.
That always works.
So, how did you end up actually at Solana or Solana Foundation?
Yeah, so I was at Multicoin at the time. We had invested in the seed round, the Solana seed round, before my time at the firm. But we were, very into the project and helping it along through mainnet launch into 2020. In 2020, I was looking to get away from the investment side a little bit and go back to like the builder side of things. And I talked to a few of our portfolio companies to see what their needs were. Solana Foundation or Solana Labs being one of the portfolio companies. So I ended up joining Solana Labs originally in 2020, and the reason why I joined was because during my time at Multicoin, the only things that we really focused on at the time were Bitcoin and Ethereum ecosystem, because that was all there really was back at the time. You had the Cosmos ecosystem, but it wasn't as built out and large as it is today. And I had found that we already saw these demand spikes in the Ethereum ecosystem where fees would go up precipitously and the user experience would be clunky and bad. And there was always the promise of like side chains or plasma or something that was going to solve this issue. And I never really found that any of them came to fruition. And it wasn't until I, learned the full thesis around Solana that like I got particularly bullish on that scaling thesis. It seemed like the way that Anatoly and the other founders had architected the blockchain was intuitively going to scale into the future, not on the basis of like needing upgrades every 2 or 3 years, but on the basis of just hardware getting better and computing just accelerating into the future. And that was a fundamentally different approach than what I had experienced during my investment time at Multicoin. So I was really excited to kind of invest in that vision, and I thought that it was something that we needed to work on at the time. Now, scaling infrastructure is pretty wide, and there are a lot of different components. But back at the time, it was really like Ethereum, and Ethereum scaling was the only bet in town, and it was very very contrarian to join Solana and give this a shot.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I think that's is always interesting to hear about the thesis from people who are in it early. So you've been at Solana for a few years now. Maybe some ups and downs.
Definitely some ups and downs for sure. But It's all been culminating to where we are today. I think that all of the ups and downs have been necessary to get the ecosystem to the point that it is today. When we're talking about like the downs of network infrastructure problems, whether it's bugs or outages or things like that, all of those things have led to solutions that now make the network more resilient than it was previously. And while they're painful at the time, I think it's necessary in order to go through those so that you get to a point of network resiliency like we're seeing today. Granted, there's always going to be some challenges. I feel like software is never a fully baked product, especially a distributed software system. But in comparison to where the network was 2 years ago, it's light years ahead. It's handling on the order of 1,500 TPS right now, whereas back in 2021 that would have crippled the network. And it's great to see the core developer ecosystem grow to the point where it is now, where it is such a decentralized ecosystem and so many diverse input points to how to make the tech even 10x, 100x better than it is today. And that's really the thing that's going to drive the network resiliency into the future. So really excited. We've definitely had our trials and tribulations, but I think it's all part of the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I remember hearing a lot in 2022 was, and I think this criticism, of course, turned out to be unfounded in retrospect, but a lot of people said, in 2018, 2017, there were all these alternative layer ones that sort of had their became popular for a brief period of time and then never recovered. Solana DeFi, I think, is more vibrant now than it's ever been. So, why do you think Solana was able to recover after 2022, 2023 in a way that many other ecosystems have not been able to?
Well, I think it's really a testament to the Solana community. I think that the people who have been building in the Solana ecosystem were building here because they fundamentally thought it was the right tech architecture for the products that they wanted to build and that it would scale into the future to allow them to acquire the users that they wanted to acquire. And I think that there is a subset of the ecosystem that, even through all of the turmoil of 2022 and thereafter, they never lost sight of that vision, and that enabled them to keep innovating through the bear market and trying to make their product better and better and better. And as you saw, I think like Q4 of last year, when interest started to come back and liquidity started to flow back into the system, those people who had been working on those projects for the last 2 years now had like a hardened protocol that was way easier to use and way more resilient than it might have been back in 2020 or 2021. And so when users did come back, the user experience was just out of the box fantastic, as opposed to some of the other ecosystems where developers may have gone away and then people were just coming back as users came back, and it's a fundamentally different environment that users have to come back into. So I think being able to come back to an ecosystem where the products are 10x, 100x better than you remember them is a really good a really good trajectory for a lot of these projects to be on, and allowed them to just continue to scale up from where they were previously.
Yeah, and that 100% was my experience because, in truth, I think I was using Solana through 2021, the first part of 2022, and then I didn't really use it for a year or so, and then started using it again in maybe spring or summer of 2023, and that was I was kind of had that wow moment where I was like, wow, this is really really good experience. Um, so you mentioned developers, right, and builders coming to the ecosystem. How has Solana attracted developers into its ecosystem?
So one of the things that I took from my time at Multicoin was the failures of previous blockchain ecosystems to try and compete with Ethereum. And one of the things that was the nail in the coffin of blockchain ecosystems, such as like the EOS ecosystem, was they were explicitly adversarial to the existing developers. It was not like a positive sum, grow the pie approach. It was a we're going to eat your lunch approach. And I always thought that that was like the wrong way to go about it. So when I had joined the Solana ecosystem back in 2020, I thought that we fundamentally needed to just grow the pie of developers who were in the ecosystem and not pull from the existing pool. And the ways in which we did that were, there were various ways, but the things that seemed to work the most in the earlier days was granted, this was in the middle of COVID, so no one was meeting up anywhere, so it was very hard to do this in a virtual setting. But we ran these virtual hackathons where the goal of the virtual hackathons was just to get people trying out the tech and like telling us what was good about the blockchain experience, what was bad, what needed to be built in dev tooling, yada, yada, yada. And those things really became the building blocks for the developer ecosystem because there was some subset of people who participated in the early hackathons who ended up staying. Maybe they built a project, maybe they built some infrastructure. And then as more people came into the ecosystem, those people became the helping hands for the next generation of developers. And they built better tooling, better documentation, and it just continued this cyclical motion over time. So we continued running these virtual hackathons and still do today. It's more distributed now through the Coliseum entity that runs the Solana ecosystem hackathons, but it is still the way in which we try and get developers into the ecosystem and just trying out the tech and seeing what they can build. And now, in the early days, it was like dev tooling and like very basic stuff. And now with the most recent hackathon, I was just reviewing some of the submissions, and they are just incredible products that some people are building. So it was a long journey to get to this point, almost 4 years, but it was definitely the thing that brought a lot of developers into the ecosystem.
And if there's any developers that happen to watch this video, where would you recommend they go to get started in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so check out Coliseum. I'm not sure what the link is. I believe it might be coliseum.org.
We'll get it in the
But
description.
yeah, if you check out the Renaissance Hackathon is the one that just concluded. The submissions will be coming out if they're not out already. Go parse through those. Coliseum will be running another one. They're typically going to be quarterly. And if you're looking to jump into those, there's a ton of resources around that. There will be funding around that too. So it's a great place to just get together with other people building in the ecosystem and give it a shot at building a product that could maybe become a company.
Cool. So pivoting back to Solana DeFi, what would you say the end game is for Solana DeFi?
Well, the end game for Solana DeFi is just really building a next generation of on-chain financial applications. The reason why a lot of people, I think, were brought to DeFi in the first place was they found that there were tons of inefficiencies with the way that our existing financial infrastructure works. And there are both new products that can come from the infrastructure that Solana can provide, and also additional efficiencies on top of like existing systems. Like, so for example, one thing that I've been talking about a lot recently is a new type of product that is fundamentally not able to be built in the TradFi system. And so, if any of your listeners are familiar with money market funds, you can take your cash and deposit it into money market funds. There's someone on the back end who manages that and earns yield on your behalf. Right now, those rates are around like 5.2%. But when you deposit into a money market fund, you need to withdraw out of the money market fund if you ever want that cash, if you need to pay rent, groceries, whatever it might be. There are some projects now across the ecosystem, but some in Solana. The Ondo team, in particular, in the Solana ecosystem, who has the USDY token. It's basically like taking your cash, depositing it into a money market fund, so it's always yield bearing. But then you have a token USDY that represents that money market fund. So while all your money is there earning yield, you can also use that token in payments networks. So that I feel is a fundamentally 10x better cash product than we have that exists today in TradFi, and allows you to both pay for groceries, rent, or whatever you might need to, while also earning yield without the needing to deposit withdrawal from a money market fund, which can be T+1, T+2 event. And for those who don't know that finance speak, that means like, settlement times 24 to 48 hours waiting for that money to go in or come out.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed since I do large majority of my transactions in crypto at this point is every time I have to do any sort of bank transfer or anything, I just think like this feels so slow compared to doing anything in crypto.
Yeah, I mean, it's anytime you have to send a wire or an ACH, I mean, just that in comparison to the speed at which you can send USDC on Solana and looking at it in full view on a block explorer, like when you send a wire out of your brokerage account, it's basically in limbo. The only way that you're going to get information on where that's been sent is by calling your brokerage account and giving them the reference number. With Solana or other blockchain ecosystems, it's entirely open, permissionless. You can audit it yourself, make sure that it's been received, and settlement happens in the span of like 3 to 4 seconds, as opposed to a wire could take anywhere from like a half a day to a couple days.
Hmm. Hmm. So what needs to happen to take us from where we are now to there?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest thing that needs to happen is there needs to be user interface improvements or just general user experience improvements. I think that it's infeasible to think that the long tail of users across the world are going to be proficient at using wallets, setting up seed phrases, not having recovery, all of these other things that we're used to in traditional like Web 2 applications. And granted, that's very hard in Web 3 since you're transferring value around. And as you get a better user experience, you typically trade off security. So it's not an easy problem to solve, but it is a necessary problem to solve. So I think that that is probably the number one thing that we need to focus on right now. People constantly talk about, oh yeah, the tech's like pretty cool, but like, is anyone using these things? And the reason why people aren't using these things is because I believe it's fundamentally hard to use them unless you're super interested in this stuff right now. And that's not a knock. It's just like the general progression of like new technologies. Like if you think back to early internet days, it was very hard to use the internet like pre 2000. Even after 2000, people were still using dial-up, where you're using the same phone line as you are for your internet line, and the experience is just generally pretty rough. But it got dramatically better in the span of like the next 5 or 10 years after that. I think that we're set up for a similar type scenario with blockchains. And I think that it's only a matter of time, but it's something that I know a lot of people are focusing on in the Solana ecosystem, and I'm excited to see more iteration there.
Yeah, 100%. One thing I always say to people is I think eventually billions of people will be using crypto, but say we get to 1 billion, just for the sake of math, right? 1 billion people using it on a daily basis. Even if 10% of those people can't handle seed phrases, right? Bottom 10%. That's 100 million people. And that's not a viable solution to say 100 million people are going to lose access to their funds because they, forgot to write it down or something like that.
Totally, totally agree.
Um, cool. So definitely want to talk about DPIN as well, decentralized physical infrastructure. For people who don't know that term, something I've noticed is there's a lot of DPIN projects on Solana. Right, I can think of things like Helium, Render, others as well that are choosing Solana to build on. Can you talk a bit about what is DPIN and why has Solana been able to attract so many DPIN projects?
Sure. So, DePIN stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks. Basically, what it is using token incentives or token incentivized networks in order to incentivize physical infrastructure. So, for the example that we just like talked about, Helium. Helium is building a decentralized mobile network where there are people who run nodes in their house, similar to how you run a node for Ethereum or Solana or something like that, except you are transmitting. There we go. You are transmitting a mobile network, and the way in which it works is it basically creates a mesh network with other people in your area. So if you have a bunch of people in Philadelphia area, New York area, wherever you're from that are running these nodes, it creates a bootstrapped network. And in return for running these nodes, you get compensated in Helium tokens or mobile tokens or whatever the token is that is native to that network. So, uh, in any other way, you would need a ton of upfront capital in order to set up this network. By using token economic incentives, you allow an easier way to bootstrap these networks, bring the network online, and then start selling in demand to that network.
Well put. And for people who don't know, I got this Helium miner in 2021, so I've been um, yeah, no, definitely a fan of that sort of use case of crypto. How do you see DePIN affecting the world at large? Because I think it makes sense to people the economics of how you can use that token incentivization to launch the network, but then the question I always get is why, right? Who cares if you can bootstrap this network?
Yeah, so I think that the the fundamental reason why you would want to create these types of networks like Helium or Render or Hive Mapper is just more efficient allocation of capital. And if you can get more efficient allocation of capital, you can usually get a cheaper end product for the user, for the consumer. Like, so for example, Helium's mobile network you can sign up for is $20 a month. Compare that to any of the leading cellular networks, whether it's AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, you're going to be paying 3x that on a monthly basis, like minimum. Uh, and so if you're able to provide services at fractions of a cost to the incumbent services, I think that that is something that is super useful for the entire world, let alone your own locality. So that is the goal here: is to provide better products that you wouldn't otherwise be able to provide without this token incentivized network.
Incredible. So besides DeFi and DePIN, which other sectors on Solana do you think people should pay attention to or look forward to launching on the Solana network?
I don't I it's very hard to draw a line between this one, where I would say it's DeFi in some
Mhm,
sense, but payments is something
mhm.
that is super core to the Solana thesis. The Solana network can just transmit payments at lightning fast speeds and at super low costs, where some other networks can't. So payments is a core focus for the ecosystem right now. And I think there's a lot of stuff coming later this year that will really show the value of the Solana blockchain for transmitting payments networks. We've already done previous work with the folks at Visa, WorldPay, some other large payments processors across the globe that are trialing out payment systems on top of Solana for their own cost efficiencies, which then get translated back down to the consumer and to the merchant. So there are direct financial benefits from running payments networks on Solana than running it on the traditional rail, where there are entities littered along the way trying to take fees at every turn. So really excited about what's happening in payments, and yeah, I would say that payments and DeFi are one and the same.
Mhm. Yeah, I always go back and forth on whether I differentiate it, but ultimately, I mean, I think finance is a pretty expansive term. I'm excited for more payments because I take credit cards for certain products, and the fees add up, right?
Well, I mean, a perfect example is like, we always talk about how we're going to get the long tail of users into crypto. And I think payments is a great way to get people into. It's a very easy to understand application. And if you can get somebody set up with a wallet or a hosted wallet, or if they're, a merchant to accept USDC or another stablecoin on top of Solana, if you can get them used to that user experience and the freedom that they have with a fully on-chain payments networks, I think it's going to be very hard for them to go back to the way that they are experiencing it today with, like, credit card swiping and like 3 to 5 days till settlement. I think that there's just so much margin for improvement that once we get a groundswell of people using these things, it's going to be very hard for people to want to go back to the old system.
100%. And actually, there's a contractor I use here in Philly who just started taking crypto payments to I guess get it faster and also save money on transaction fees.
It's awesome.
So to wrap things up, talk a little bit about crypto industry at large. Where do you see the industry moving over the next 5 years?
Yeah, so going back to one of my earlier points, I think that there's going to be a shift towards user experience. I think that it was hard for people to focus on user experience previously without the scaling infrastructure being hardened and being usable. Now that you have architectures like Solana or similar, it's easier to build user scale applications and not have to worry about the scalability aspects. So you can start to fine tune and focus on the user experience, and I think that that will be a real paradigm shift in the next 5 years. I think you'll see a lot of focus on moving up the stack, where a lot of the conversation today is more like low level infrastructure stuff. And then you're going to start to move it up the stack in the same way that the internet did as applications started coming online and then mobile came online. So I think that you're just going to see this slow progression away from like the super technical stuff into the more higher stack application side, and making sure that that's fine tuned for people to be able to use easily.
Awesome. And then final question: you've had a lengthy career in the industry, moving from through different sorts of roles, and it sounds like moving from entry level to a fairly high position. What career advice would you give to someone looking to get into crypto?
Yeah, I would say the number one career advice that I can give is start writing down your thoughts about where you think this is going, or just start writing about things that you're interested in crypto, and start publishing that on your Twitter, on the Substack, on Medium, because not only does that become a way for you to connect with other like-minded individuals in crypto, it also becomes a de facto resume for you. So, for example, when I was applying to Multicoin, the application was not an online application. It was a, hey, send us a blog post about something that you're interested in or something that you think that we got wrong, and try and show us that you're worthy of being on the team. And so that still is a way that people are hired in crypto today. So if there's a number one thing that I can recommend, it's writing blogs and publishing those publicly to connect with other people and basically to use it as a resume.
I agree 100%. And before we finish the interview, I'll add a quick anecdote for myself. That's similar to how I got into it. Circa May of 2022, I had already been doing YouTube videos for a year, so I had a modest following, maybe 5,000 people on Twitter, 10,000 on YouTube. Had a job offer in the industry. USTD pegged, so the job offer fell through, and I'd already left my other job. So, almost no one was hiring, couldn't get something. So I said, okay, every day I'm going to publish 7 pieces of analysis on Twitter. So every morning I'd wake up and pull up DeFi Llama and other charts and to do things. Fast forward 2 years, have 130,000 followers on all platforms, and it just turned into all sorts of opportunities that I never imagined, and literally all came from doing exactly what you said, just writing down my thoughts and sharing it on a regular basis.
There you go. Case in point.
Great. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Ben. I think this is really interesting interview to hear the perspective on Solana from someone that works at the foundation. Any parting thoughts you want to share?
Nope. If anyone's looking to get into the Solana ecosystem, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @BennyBitcoins. And you can reach me there. Feel free to tweet at me or shoot me a DM, but always happy to chat about Solana.
Thanks so much, Ben.